Island Powell River.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And first of all, I just want to start by saying how disappointed I am that we are here having this debate on a concurrence motion when we should be debating the trade agreement with the Ukraine. You know, I just have to stand here and express the profound grief that I am hearing from so many across my riding of North Island Powell River. You know, when the illegal war began, when Russia invaded Ukraine, there was just a feeling of profound heartbreak. I have a lot of Ukrainians in my riding who came together to fight really hard to do all they could. And I remember sitting on the phone with members who were telling me that they were calling their families at home, and in the background they could hear the explosions, and they were so worried about where they were and if they were safe. Conversations where explosions would happen and the line would die. I sat, as I hope many people in this place have, with people who are refugees from Ukraine, who are so terrified. They don't even know when it's going to be safe to go home. They're worried about their loved ones. This is really important. And here we are discussing a committee report that was unanimously agreed upon, instead of talking about how we can work to make this country stronger and better and how we can work with Ukraine in a positive way. So I think it's important that as we have these discussions, we remember that we are the voices of our constituents and that so many of them right now are hurting profoundly. And it's important because we know that when this happens, it destabilizes other countries. And that destabilization has an impact on all of our communities and our countries. The people who are in our communities that are related to those folks in other countries, they have a profound response, and we must recognize that. And that leads me, of course, to think about my personal pain and heartbreak connected to the profoundly terrifying experience we're seeing right now in Israel and Gaza. You know, all of us in this country are seeing things on the screen, and it's painful for us to see it. I cannot imagine living it. And our leader has been very clear repeatedly in this place and in the media that we condemn unequivocally the terrorist violence of Hamas, which has killed thousands. And I've heard from the Jewish community in my riding and outside of my riding of the profound pain, concern, and trauma that they are experiencing right now because of this action. And what we are witnessing in Gaza is beyond overwhelming. We know that children are being killed at a rate that we have not seen in a very long time, that women and the elderly are indiscriminately attacked. So many are dying. Civilians of these countries are dying. And we must all stand together to say that isn't okay. The NDP and our leader has been very clear. We are calling for an immediate ceasefire. And I despair that this government has not chosen to stand up on this issue. When we see what we are seeing, we have an obligation morally to call for a ceasefire, to do all that we can as a country to stand strong against it. Because we all know historically what it looks like when we don't. How many apologies do we have to make in this place because we don't stand up and do the thing that is right when it is time to do it? And right now in our own country, anti-Semitism, anti-Palestine hate is increasing, Islamophobia is increasing, and people are afraid. They're afraid for themselves, and they're afraid for their loved ones, and they're afraid for our children. When we don't stand up collectively, we create a much less safe environment for everyone. And I think that's really important. When we think about our privilege in this place, we have to think about how we take that power and what we do with it. And when we do things what that means for people who don't have the same voice as us. So people aren't safe. They're not safe. And we all have to stand up against that. You know, Mr. Speaker, I remember speaking with a dear friend of mine who escaped the Holocaust very barely and lost so many loved ones to concentration camps. And she no longer believed in God. She no longer believed that anything in the world could allow this to happen. And I remember having those conversations with her and the terror that she had experienced. But one of the things that I will never forget, Mr. Speaker, is she said, "I don't believe in God, but I pray for peace unceasingly. Every day I pray for peace because I don't want anyone to experience what I've experienced. I don't want anyone to lose the family that I have lost." So I hope that all of us are remembering that every time we don't do all that we can for peace, we are really disrespecting those who are gone. And in this time as well, Mr. Speaker, that we're seeing an increase in foreign interference in our elections, where we're seeing destable communities, or communities being destabilized because of an active agenda of some countries to interfere, we have to again remember that every step we take matters, that people are watching, they're looking for leadership and stability, they're looking for consistency. So I hope and I call on this government again, please stand up. Please stand up and say it's time for a ceasefire, and that our voice collectively as Canada is calling for that, so that civilians get what they need to survive and so that we can do everything in the name of justice moving forward. But to come back to this concurrence motion that is about Ukraine, and I'm going to talk about it. Again, I want to remind all of the listeners at home, and of course, especially of North Island Powell River, that this is something that the Conservatives moved. It's a concurrence motion, which means we are not debating the bill that we were supposed to debate today, which is on having a trade agreement with the Ukraine. That the report that we are right now spending this time debating was supported unanimously. And so we're debating it to say again that we're going to agree with the report. And I think it's important that this committee is the Foreign Affairs Committee. And right now that committee is meeting. And what they are meeting about, Mr. Speaker, is the situation at the Russia-Ukraine border and the implications for peace and security. So right now that work is happening in another space in this place, really important work, largely Global Institute for Food Security are talking. This is about the United Nations World Food Program. Here's just a few, the grain farmers of Ontario. Those are the witnesses, some of the witnesses today. So they're talking about the importance of this. So why are we here when this work has already been done? Why are the Conservatives making us debate something that has already been agreed upon? Why? I think there's political reasons, and it's very disappointing. It's very disappointing. Because if there's a problem that they have with this bill that is in front of this House, then let's debate it. Let's do the work of this House and look after that. You know, Mr. Speaker, I have to say in my riding not too long ago, we had an amazing event, a couple of events actually, and the event was called Still Standing with Ukraine. The Comox Valley Ukrainian Cultural Society put it together. It was a couple of events just to bring awareness again to what was happening in Ukraine, to highlight some of the refugees locally within our region that are in our communities and doing the best that they can when they are under such emotional distress because of what's happening in their own country. It was a beautiful event where we got to see some profoundly amazing Ukrainian dancers from Alberta that came out to fundraise to make sure that the people here in our area have the supports that they need. And I want a special thank you to Jeanette Martin-Lutzer, who is the ED there, who just did a phenomenal job of educating people. And Mr. Speaker, I just think it's so important. I want to say that when this happened in my riding, When Russia attacked Ukraine, we had so many phone calls in our office. Tons of people were calling. They wanted to do all they could to help. And so what we did is, as we collected a list, it was a significant list of constituents. We were able to create an email list, and then our office went out and found everybody in the region that was doing work to support refugees who were coming. And we were able to bring them all together. We did a town hall. Mr. Speaker, a lot of people showed up for the virtual town hall, and all those organizations and groups that are doing incredible work in the riding were able to talk about what they were doing, how they were doing it, and how people could help. It was amazing. And that's something that I'm so proud of in my riding, is when people need help, like we came together. We have a large Syrian family that's in our riding. A lot of people came together to support that family, and every time I see the leaders of that family, every time I'm told about all the success because of what the community invested, because the community stood up. So again, for this, I've just been profoundly moved. People come together. They want to support people who are struggling, who are suffering, and we need to make sure that those supports are in place. So why are we here debating this when there's so much work to be done? So, I'll talk about some of the recommendations and show the people that, again, all parties agree. One of the recommendations, that the Government of Canada continue to play a leading role in the pursuit of justice and accountability for war crimes, crimes against humanity, and violations of international human rights and humanitarian law in relation to Russia's war against Ukraine. Well, Mr. Speaker, I agree with this, and I think this is something that we should be talking about in the context of what we're seeing happen in other places in the world. But of course, we want to see the Government of Canada stand up. Hopefully every party here, and according to this report, all parties agree that we should do that. We should stand up for human rights and for justice. I know people in my riding are calling for that. They want to see action taken. They want to see accountability. And they want to know that human rights are being protected and that Canada is doing everything possible to make sure that those human rights are being protected. Another recommendation, that the Government of Canada work with Ukraine and other international partners in support of the documentation, investigation, and prosecution of sexual and gender-based violence committed during Russia's war against Ukraine, and provide support to survivors. Mr. Speaker, this is a particular passion of mine. We know that in every war, women and children are the focus of much violence, as well as the 2S LGBTQIA plus community are targeted for horrific crimes that we should never see happen, but we know unfortunately do. We need to make sure that there is processes put into place. I know in my work in the NATO Parliamentary Association, we have talked about this, how important it is for women, peace, and security, that these things are documented, making sure that international law has the capacity to take information. Mr. Speaker, things are changing quickly, and how information is recorded, often on social media, is something that we need to make sure, if things are recorded and it can be verified as a clear source, that that information can be used in international law to hold people to account for the violence that they do during wartime. And so there's a lot of conversations. I'm glad to see that all parties agree that this is important. We need to protect people. We need to have very strong international law so that when people do terrible things like this, they know that they're going to be held to account. Another recommendation, that the Government of Canada work with Ukraine and other international partners to prosecute individuals principally responsible for Russia's crime of aggression against Ukraine by supporting the establishment of a special tribunal for the crime of aggression against Ukraine or other similar mechanism. Mr. Speaker, it's a little bit rich to be in this space having this conversation, knowing that the work is being done in committee, and here we are agreeing to agree instead of talking about how we're going to support Ukraine in this trade deal, which, we're at the part where it hasn't even gone to committee yet. Let's get it to committee. If there's concerns, let's do the work in committee. That's where the work happens. Again, I'm sorry, Mr. Speaker, but I am frustrated. You know, at a time in the world where we're seeing so much incredible violence, when we know that young people across this country are worried about that violence, we know they're worried about the climate crisis that we're in and the fact that we're teetering on the brink of profound outcomes that could leave the world physically unsafe for people to even be here. Why are we wasting the time of this place when we could be doing the work that needs to be done? There is serious things happening in this country, in other countries, where we have to take a leadership role as Canada, and this is what we're doing instead. So, Mr. Speaker, I know my time is coming to an end, but I think it's really important that we talk about this recommendation about strengthening global food security and the role of Ukraine as one of its guarantors, and join the efforts with Ukraine on the Black Sea Grain Initiative in the Global South. We know, Mr. Speaker, that the reality is we've done sanctions. I've seen the graphs in my work at the NATO Parliamentary Association that the sanctions had an impact and then they lost it. We need to support this country. So thank you so much, and I hope that we can get on to more important business.